Well, good morning if you are in San Francisco, always a beautiful place to be. Good afternoon in New York, where I am, always a crazy place to be. Greetings to people all around the world listening to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to fans all around the world. My guest today joins me from San Francisco. She is Catherine Cook, also known as Kathy Cook, a mezzo-soprano. She is what is known in opera as a Publikum's Liebling, beloved of the public. She has been with the company for 33 years, and the company is 100 years old. So you have been with the company for 1/3 of its existence. How did you get there?
I was studying, doing my artist diploma in Cincinnati Conservatory and decided to audition for Merola, which is the young artist training program at San Francisco Opera. And from that summer program, they choose a few artists to stay on for what's called an Adler Fellowship. Named after Kurt Herbert Adler. And so I was lucky enough to be chosen for that. And that's a 2-year program. And then I just stayed, and now they just can't get rid of me. So
Um, I want listeners to know that Kathy Cook was given an award a couple of years ago, a prize, a medal really, called the San Francisco Opera Medal, which is the highest award given by the company, bestowed in recognition of exceptional and devoted artistic service over many years. And in the statement, which was October 31st, 2022, it said, in her to date 31 years with San Francisco Opera, mezzo-soprano Catherine Cook has performed 42 roles in 56 productions for a total of 374 performances. While a San Francisco Opera Adler Fellow, Cook made her company debut in 1991 as Mavra in Prokofiev's War and Peace, and quickly began establishing her extensive repertoire on the War Memorial Opera House stage, including several signature roles, which she has reprised on numerous occasions. Her 39 performances as Marcellina in Le Notte di Figaro and 61 as Berta in Il Barbiere di Siviglia, each a company record, stand as indelible portrayals in San Francisco Opera's 100-year history, thanks to her vocal and dramatic artistry. Cook's numerous San Francisco Opera highlights also include Jade Boucher in the world premiere of Jake Hagee's Dead Man Walking, the title role in Tobias Picker's Dolores Claiborne, which I saw, Mrs. McLean in Carlisle Floyd's Susanna, and La Frugola, which I wish I had seen, in Puccini's Il Tabarro. A valued performer with other leading American opera companies, including Metropolitan Opera, Houston Grand Opera, and Santa Fe Opera, Cook balances her busy performing career with being an educator. As a professor of voice at San Francisco Conservatory of Music, she holds the Frederica von Stade Distinguished Chair in Voice. So I'm going to start by asking you, you play roles in many of my favorite operas, which are a lot of people's favorite operas. I think Berta in Il Barbiere di Siviglia is a priceless role. She's the one who basically has to clean up everybody else's mess, whether it's Rosina or Bartolo or Almaviva or even the Il Barbiere. She comes in and she just tries to put everything right. And the mess that they make, depending on the production, could be very explosive. It could just be chaos. And Rossini's brilliant orchestral passages there communicate the anxiety and the chaos. And then she comes in, often sneezing because of all the dust that's been kicked up. And it's a classic aria that I remember at the Met for many years was cut, and now thankfully it's restored. How do you approach a role for which you are beloved, and how do you keep it fresh?
Wow, that's a great question. I think it's always fresh because it's usually with different people. It's with different artists, and I've done several productions many times. So there was, the famous Johannes Schaff production at San Francisco Opera, which may be my favorite. And it was a revolving house. And when we were doing it, I was actually pregnant and I wasn't telling anyone yet. And I was on stage the entire show, which has happened a lot when I do Berta. And so we call it Berta's Dream. Yeah. I remember during that production in particular, Paul Plishka, during a rehearsal, looked at me and said, "You should have asked for a bigger fee." And I was like, yes, I should have, if I would have known I was going to be on stage the whole time. But anyway, every time the house would turn, I would be like, but how do I keep it? I mean, I think there's so many, Berta is so much fun and there's so many facets to her character. And I think I just kind of play off of what's going on stage. And I think each Rosina is different. Obviously every Figaro is different. And especially the character that I play off most is Bartolo. And so, of course, doing it with so many fantastic artists. And, I think a lot of her job too is listening. A lot of what I do in the roles that I sing I'm listening a lot and listening not as the character that I'm listening to, but listening as my character. And I think that's something I learned early in my career was in order to be who I am as the character, I have to really stay myself and listen and react as my character and not sort of, become the other person. And I think that's a real craft that I've learned over the years. And of course, being inspired by people like Judy Kristen, she was a big influence on me in my young career. But as Berta, I think it's so much fun because, like you said, I'm just putting out fires, the whole time. And then, I've done productions where I played strip poker with Ambrogio under a blanket and was down to my corset, So it just opens itself up to so many different interpretations. So I've done her as kind of old and crotchety, and then I've done her really sort of young and flamboyant. So yeah, I mean, it's always new, always new.
Kathy, we have an international audience on this show. And in certain countries, they don't know what strip poker is. Would you please define that?
Strip poker is a card game or it can be a drinking game where every time you lose the hand, you take off an article of clothing. So as Berta, I lost most of the time. Yeah. So I was always down my little bloomers and my little corset. So yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I love the role. And I just, the last time we did it at San Francisco Opera, it was during the pandemic. So we did a drive-in. And they basically rented the stage from Coachella and set it up in a giant parking lot in Marin. And you drove in and you turned your radio on a certain number, and everybody said the sound was unbelievable. And we ate a lot of bugs, but
yeah. So this was like in the 1950s and 60s. We see the movies in California of people driving to an outdoor movie theater, a cinema, and except it was outdoor opera.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
2021, and it was, Lucas Meacham and Daniela Mack and Alex Schrader, and it was just I have to say was my favorite because we were just so joyful and so happy to to be singing, and so anyway, so yeah, I've done many iterations of it, and it's just always a joy.
And which was mentioned in the statement from when you got your medal was Marcellina in Le Nozze di Figaro. Now, you and I know that these two operas are related. The Barber of Seville becomes Figaro, the manservant in The Marriage of Figaro. The Countess is Rosina. The Countess in Le Nozze di Figaro is
Right.
Rosina, a younger version. Count Almaviva goes from being a high tenor to a baritone or bass in Le Nozze di Figaro. Beaumarchais wrote both plays on which they're based. Marcellina is a wonderful, wonderful role because she again is the comic engine of the opera. There are other funny characters, but she's the one who's, along with Cherubino, I think, who provides most of the laughs.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about Marcellina. Who is she in relation to Figaro and to Susanna and the others in the opera?
Well, Marcellina, of course, at the end ends up being Figaro's mother, sua madre. But at the beginning, she's actually, interested in him, and of course, it's she's conspiring with Bartolo, and so yeah, she is the comic relief in the show, not relief, but she is the comic engine, as you said. That's a great word. But I think she really takes herself seriously, and I think that's what's so funny about her. At least the way I play comedy, I think it has to come from, you don't try to be funny, you just let the material do it for you. So, and she's after that money, so she's trying to, like, make this plan with Bartolo, and I think then at the
In other
end,
words, to get the money that Figaro has, I should know this, that was left to him because
as
he's supposed to
dowry.
marry Susanna, a dowry. That's
Exactly. Yes,
right.
yes. So, and then it's this, I mean, it has to be one of the quickest turnarounds ever in opera
Yep.
because, there's this shock of, Figaro we discovered that he
Birthmark.
has, yeah, this spatola impressa al braccio
Yeah.
destro,
Right.
this birthmark.
Yep.
And then Bartolo tries to run away, and I say, wait a minute, you know, you're
You're the
actually
father.
father. Yeah.
E questo tuo padre.
Yeah. So, and then all of a sudden, it's this big turnaround. Then Marcellina just turns into this, like, this mother, and she's,
Yeah.
embracing Figaro. So it's just such a huge, and that's
Because
why
it's
the
her long
audience,
lost baby in a way. It's,
yes.
a funnier version of Il Trovatore.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And then follows, which is, I mean, one of the best sextets ever, I think, in operas is, the sextet after that, with all of us, figlio amato, all of that. I mean, it's so beautiful, and it's so charming, it's really just, I don't know, it's just so magical. I mean, it's
And
my
very
favorite
fast.
opera.
It's a long opera, but it goes very fast. So at a
It
certain
does.
point, Figaro is trying to explain to Susanna that you are in fact his mother and not her rival. And he says, Senti, listen, listen, senti. And she slaps him and says,
Yep.
Senti questo, feel that. And he
Yeah.
turns around and he says, Mama. He is fully incorporated having a mother in about
Yes.
27.
Yes. 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 And then she's like, trying to
It is
typical.
it's brilliant. I mean, it's not my favorite Mozart opera, I confess to that, but it is so brilliant and
It is.
moving.
It
And
is.
because the characters are all human, very human. And I know that there are many people who, when they see that opera, feel more for the Countess and her isolation, her abandonment. I don't think many people identify with the Count.
No.
Certain people identify with, we're not getting political here, but a number of years ago, Peter Sellers, Sellars, did a production of La Dolce di Figaro set in the Trump Tower in New York back when Donald Trump was with a different wife. And Donald Trump was the Count, so to speak. And Carabino was a hockey player, kid from down the hall. And
Amazing.
Suzanne was the maid. And as I said, I'm not getting political here, but this was at least 30 years ago. And Trump Tower represented the home of the wealthy, and Susanna was a maid, and Figaro was a servant, and it was all there. He didn't change a word in the opera, and it
Wow.
just worked completely. And Ivana, his wife of then, was the Countess. It was
Wow.
very, yeah, because what great opera productions do is they don't try to shoehorn a story into one another. They simply do the story as written, but maybe with a different visual. And that's
Hmm.
all that was needed. So that
Yeah.
when Kelly jumps out the window, so to speak, he's jumping out of the Trump Tower.
Brilliant.
Yeah. But
Brilliant.
anyway,
Mm.
um,
Wow.
so I saw you in many roles, thankfully. But one of the ones I want to talk about, my guest not too long ago was Tobias Picker on this program. And he's written 7 operas, and one of them is Dolores Claiborne, which premiered in San Francisco. And it's based on a novella by Stephen King. It was a film, and there were 2 artists singing the leading role. It was you and Patricia Racette. And I saw both artists, and um, it was it was quite something. This is an example of you're playing a leading role, the title role. And would you talk about just the preparations for playing a new role with the composer present? You didn't have Mozart or Rossini for the roles we just spoke about. But how is it different, San Francisco Opera being a place that generates many world premieres, to have the composer there in terms of you're developing the character, the title character?
Uh, it's really an incredible experience. With Dolores Claiborne, I ended up singing the workshop performance of it.
Mm-hmm.
So my preparation for that role started uh, long before the actual production. So I was able to really, work with Tobias before the production even started. And that's doing, most new pieces have a workshop. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
lucky to do the workshop and the show, that just makes for, I mean, it's just wonderful. Because the workshop, for those of you, listening that don't know about new works, usually there's a workshop of it where the composer and the librettist and singers are all there, and we kind of work through the show piece by piece, and that way the composer, because the composer can finally hear what they've been working on, and the librettist can as well, and then they can sort of tweak things and say, okay, well, that scene is going on for too long, or that doesn't work, or that really works. And so to be part of something like that is really incredible, because it's not like Marriage to Figaro where there's hundreds of recordings and many Marcellinis that went before. And
Yeah.
so creating a new role is super exciting, really terrifying actually as well. um and so that's how that process started. And then I wasn't originally supposed to perform the role, and then I ended up doing 2 performances.
Right.
And then throughout the process of the rehearsals, I was sort of, on call,
Right.
which was pretty stressful, but also an incredible opportunity. I've always been obsessed with Kathy Bates, And she's
Who
like,
played it in the movie? Yep.
yes, who played it in the movie.
Yep.
So I was just, yeah, I was just like floored to have that opportunity to create a role like that that's so different from anything else that I had ever done. I mean, because as you know, I mean, I play mostly comic things, and so to have the opportunity to create that, and with Tobias, and Tobias was fantastic. You know,
Hmm.
I've worked with a lot of composers, and he was just very open and, you know, very appreciative of my feedback as well. And so it was a fabulous, the workshop was a fabulous process, and
Hmm.
I thought the production was incredible. I just thought
It was.
the physical
Here's
production.
something I've seldom asked an artist. I could, I should, I guess, because to me it's second nature and it is to you, but it would not necessarily be for the general public. Um, I worked at the Met for many years and got to be in the sphere of and close to James Levine and watch him in rehearsal. And his philosophy of rehearsal always was that you do all the work in the rehearsal and then the performance is not work, it's pleasure. And that you really work incredibly hard, but you address difficult issues, whether they're musical or dramatic. You try to work everything out so that
Mhm.
once you step on the stage for the opening, number one, you have the confidence of what you're doing. But number two, you are freed musically, artistically, and energetically to do a full performance on the stage. So, in your long experience, 33 years at San Francisco Opera and performing elsewhere, talk in any way you want to about the rehearsal process and what it means to you, and how, especially when you work with younger colleagues, how you imbue in them the sense of the meaning of rehearsals.
I am a person that I love rehearsals. I love the whole process. I love just the creativity that happens, the back and forth. You know, sometimes the director was like, "Do you mind running this again?" I'm like, "No, no." And I absolutely concur with Maestro Levine, what he said about rehearsal. It is your chance to work things out. And I talk to my students a lot about rehearsal process, and it's something that's not to kind of pivot to that, but it kind of all goes together. But it's something that's not really talked about in education, and I sort of had to learn on my feet, like when to mark, when not to mark.
Explain
Um,
what marking is.
Marking is in rehearsals when you want to save your voice. So you either sing at half volume, or sometimes you'll drop down the octave.
Yep.
If there's a high note, you want to drop down the octave. There's an art to marking, and I think it's something that is not taught enough. I do teach it, and I talk about it all the time with my students, because we have these two little tiny pieces of flesh, and unlike a pianist or a violinist or another instrument, we can't sing full out 6 hours a day, or we
Right.
shouldn't. And so we have to find a way to save our voices but
Hmm.
still maintain the full energy of the character. And I think that's what is so challenging about marking. And I love to mark. I feel like I can really find my footing in a rehearsal in the character, and find the physicality of the character and not have to worry about my voice. So I practice and coach the vocal part before the rehearsals start, so I know it's in my voice. And then I come to the rehearsal process and I want to find, you know, the physicality, the gestures, where how I relate to the other characters, and then start to put, you know, the voice in, and then, you know, put all the pieces together. So that's just kind of my process.
Hmm.
So
For
I'm not.
listeners, I'm going to add something that, again, Kathy, you and I know, but we can't assume everyone does. In rehearsals, if the rehearsal period is 3 or 4 weeks, let's say, you don't always have an orchestra there. You usually have a pianist there with a so-called piano reduction that
Mhm.
will give a sense of what the orchestra is doing. You may have the conductor, he or she may be there, or you may have rehearsal assistants and assistant conductors who will be
Mhm.
working the musical elements of the rehearsal while the stage director does the blocking, the staging. So
Yes.
I'm going to put you on the spot. And if you don't want to be on the spot, you just tell me. No obligations here. You said that there's an art to marking. Could you mark something for us now in any aria you want that you're happy singing right now, this
Okay.
morning in San Francisco? And just to give an idea of what you mean, because it's not whispering, obviously. It's some,
No, no.
yeah.
So if I were to sing like the beginning of Berta, like that's like full. If I was gonna mark, I'd sing something like that. So it's not full out, but it's
Mhm.
not that's not marking,
Right. Because
right?
that would
It
tighten up the vocal cords. Yeah.
absolutely. In fact, to mark, I feel you almost need more breath support. And that's
Hmm.
what's so great about marking. If you're doing it correctly, you're really engaging the body because to sing beep, 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 right? I have to be really connected as opposed to beep, 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 right? So it's interesting. I mean, I'm kind of sort of getting into technique, but
Yeah.
it really is, it is a real connection. I mean, I've worked with so many great singers over the years. I think my dear friend Pat Rissette is, I love the way she marks, and I've learned so much from her over
Mm.
the years of how she marks, because she marks with such intensity and
Yeah.
such support to the body. What you don't want to do is, and she doesn't do this at all, but I've been around rehearsal processes where the singer marks the entire time and then they get with the orchestra and then they haven't been singing at all. So you do have to work out certain parts of the role vocally in rehearsal. That's your time to kind of be like, this phrase has really been bugging me. I need to sing this out a few times in rehearsal to make sure that I can do it on my feet with all the other stuff going on. Because we don't really sing with orchestra until the Sitzprobe, which is basically the orchestra and the artists just kind of sitting and kind of going through the score together. And that comes right before the dress rehearsals on stage. So maybe if we're in like a 3-week rehearsal process, we wouldn't get to the orchestra rehearsals till about 2 to 2.5 weeks into the rehearsals. So yeah, so there's kind of a, you know, uh, a trajectory that happens leading up to the stage rehearsals. And I just love the process. I love the
Mhm.
process because I think it's like a playground, and you can try different things. And sometimes the director will be like, no, that doesn't work. Or,
Mhm.
oh, I like that. Can we think about that? Can we talk about that? Like for in some of the more contemporary operas, like for Innocence, there was a
Which you did
table.
in June, which I'm going to talk to you about a little more. Innocence. Yeah.
Yeah, I covered in that, and there was a table reading, which is basically what they do for plays, which is everybody sits around a table and you just read through the libretto like a play.
Hmm.
And that's really interesting, and I think more of that needs to happen, especially with the contemporary English pieces, because then you're just away from the music and you can really get a sense of the kind of the structure of the text and the arc of the play. Yeah.
So
So
since you mentioned Innocence, maybe I will bring that up now. It was San Francisco Opera in June tends to do 3 or sometimes 4 operas in repertory. It's a wonderful mini season. It's always wonderful being in San Francisco, but especially nice in June because while much of the country is hot, San Francisco is cool,
Yes.
almost chilly.
Yes.
And
Yes.
a lot of the wonderful farms surrounding San Francisco bring their produce to the ferry terminal market, and that's when the almonds are there and the cherries are there and the Gravenstein apples. The
Hmm.
produce in June is pretty terrific. So I
Wonderful.
will spend my day at the market unless I'm working on something in San Francisco, and then go to performances the evening. San Francisco Symphony always does something rather special in June, so it's very festive. Um, Gay Pride Month is June, so half the gay world arrives in San Francisco. The baseball season is already on, and the Giants are playing. And sometimes San Francisco Opera will stream an opera to the baseball stadium, and you can go and get the garlic fries or the crab sandwiches and sit and eat crab and French fried potatoes watching an opera in the ballpark. And then if you go to a game, it's right near the bay, I think it is. And San Francisco, the stadium has these Portuguese water dogs who, when a ball gets hit into the bay, the dogs go running and jump into the water to retrieve the ball. So
That's
everything is more fun in San Francisco, let's put it that way. And but in the middle of this particular June, I was not there. I watched the opera streaming. Um, was the last opera by the late and much lamented Kaija Saariaho, the Finnish composer. I had as my guest recently Olga Heikkilä, who is Finnish and was covering a role, but also was the Finnish language coach for members of the company. This opera was in various languages. It's rather unusual. Do you want to talk a bit about that opera?
I'd
Because
love to
I
talk.
should add, you unfortunately did not have the composer present because she died rather suddenly like a year ago. And
Yeah.
so therefore, unlike Tobias Picker, whom you had, Kaija Saariaho was not there for this premiere. And
Mhm.
someone like Olga, being Finnish and having worked on it before, was something of a connective thread into your production in San Francisco.
Absolutely. As was Clement, the conductor, because he had worked with Kaya. And then there were several cast members who have done all the productions so far. One of them being the amazing Lucy Shelton, who
Yes.
I covered, and in the role of the teacher. The opera uh, takes place 10 years after a school shooting in Helsinki, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so there's sort of two stories going on at the same time. There's a wedding happening downstairs in this amazing structure, this set. Oh my gosh, one of the most amazing sets I've ever seen on the stage of San Francisco Opera. And then the top floor was the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the students were deceased and were kind of ghosts, and then others were still alive. And so there's the wedding that's happening downstairs, just in short. There's a wedding, and the waitress that's called in to waitress the wedding realizes that the groom is the brother of the school shooter and her daughter
Mm-hmm.
was one of the victims.
Yeah.
So it just kind of unfolds as the evening goes on, and it's like an hour and 45 minutes straight through with no intermission, and it's like it's 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 like a gut punch. I don't know how you felt watching it, but being part of
Well, I
it was.
would have preferred to see it in the theater, obviously, but I was happy San Francisco does streaming. I'm not a big fan of streaming opera. I tend not to watch it, but this one I did watch because it was my first chance to see it. It's coming to the Metropolitan Opera soon. I don't know exactly when. And I will obviously go see it a few times in the theater. I knew Kaija Saariaho, so she was a magnificent composer. Um, I'm also friends with Matthew Schilbach, who is the head of the San Francisco Opera. And when I knew that I was going to be talking to you, I got in touch with him and I said, Matthew, I want you to write a tribute to Kathy Cook. And so I'm going to read it to you.
What?
He sent this to me
Oh,
in June when you were in rehearsal. Kathy has for 33 years been an exemplar of the artistic spirit of San Francisco opera. From her time as an Adler Fellow through over 40 roles, she's connected to audiences with an artistry both soulful and joyful, creating art with integrity, collegiality, and great wisdom. In roles as diverse as Marcellina and Figaro to the title role of Dolores Claiborne, she embodies the full spectrum of humanity, and she does so with extraordinary authenticity, an ability to communicate emotional depth, and a profound care for her colleagues. And she believes fervently in passing on her stage and vocal knowledge to new generations of singers. She is a fabulous mentor. At the moment, she is covering the profoundly impactful role of the teacher in Innocence. That she is able to take on this role with its raw emotionality and unique vocal techniques is a huge testament to her versatility, artistic courage, and extraordinary artistic talent. It's a great privilege to have Kathy a member of the San Francisco Opera family, and we were so proud to award her in 2022 with the Opera Medal.
oh my goodness, Fred.
So this is your life, Kathy Cook. Well, I
You're
mean,
gonna make
this
me
is
cry.
what he describes. We're friends, he and I. And what he describes is the artist that I know. I don't know you obviously the way he does because he works with you, and technically, I guess you could say he's your boss. But as I said at the beginning of our conversation, when I come to San Francisco, obviously I come to see whatever is on the stage, but I always check the cast and I always check which ones you're in so that I'll be sure to have coffee before because I'm jet lagged from New York. It's not you, it's me and the jet lag. Um, because it's a special experience, and I think that Matthew communicated very well the experience of watching you on the stage, and he also communicated very well what you and I spoke about a little bit, the rehearsal process.
That's so that's so moving and so kind. I really pretty much speechless, and that never happens. So
Yeah.
I'm so
So
I'm
let's
so
get you talking again. So if that happens.
um wow,
Um,
wow. You know, yeah, I mean, being part of um I'll go back to Innocence, but being part of that was such an amazing process because I've never done Sprechstimme. And for those of you who don't know,
define Sprechstimme, yeah.
yeah, Sprechstimme is basically when we get a score, there's musical notes. There's notes on the page, and in Sprechstimme, it's X's
Mm-hmm.
on the actual staff paper, which means you're supposed to like know what the pitches are, not sing them and not speak them. It's somewhere in between singing and speaking. And I had never done that before. And Lucy Shelton, who I was covering, is basically, the how the kids say the OG of Sprechstimme. I'm so hip. Yeah, my kids would be like, "Mom, please don't say OG." But she's world famous. So anyway, it was really an interesting process preparing this role because I was just sort of listening to recordings of Pierre Lunaire and different things that had Sprechstimme and also the gravity of the role was really, really heavy and big for me and very personal because I'm a teacher and that's what I spend a lot of my days in the studio working with students and so that was a really intense experience. But Lucy was so kind and at the beginning of the rehearsal process, she said, "I would love to work with you." And I said, "I would love that. You're gonna teach. I don't have to be I'm not the teacher, you teach me.
Mhm.
And so she came to my studio, and she worked with me on the role, and kind of gave me a little bit of a historical, um a little history on the role, about how her and Kaya uh wrote the role, because it was created for her.
Yep.
And she told a funny story that she, because Lucy does all these extended vocal techniques, and screaming and woo, all this and vocal fry, which is like, you know, and so Lucy said, well, I have some ideas. And so she created this whole thing, and she brought it to Kaya, and she said, Kaya looks at it and, no, we're not doing it. She said, maybe we'll do 3 of those things. But anyway, so she really passed on so much of the knowledge of the role. And at the end, we both got a little bit emotional, and she said, Kaya would have loved this.
Yeah.
And that was just so special, so special to have that experience. And I think this piece is, and I don't say this very often, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
It's a masterpiece, and I feel it's so timely, and it's a really important work of art. And it's hard to call it an opera, because there's a spoken dialogue, and it's the way the music is interweaved.
Fidelio and Di Zavaflot have spoken dialogue, and it works.
Yeah, but I mean, this is, I don't know, I can't explain it. It feels like I would call it like a theatrical experience, because it really is so groundbreaking.
Yeah.
The way the dialogue is used, and how it seamlessly goes from the wedding scene up to the students, and then back, and you're just drawn in, to this, experience. And it really, I mean, it's the storytelling is I didn't expect to be blown away like I was by the piece, because I knew it would be really emotional, and a hard piece,
Right.
like Dead Men Walking,
Yep.
but this was really just, I felt it was just so brilliant, and it truly is a masterpiece. And
Would you
I
talk
think everyone
some
needs to
about
see it.
what the teacher does in the opera? Because she's a bit of a connective thread in a way between the upper and the lower, I've just thought of this, I had not before, that there are other operas that have, quote, the upper and the lower,
Mm-hmm.
with 2 kinds of action, Die Frau und Schatten, for example. But Ariadne auf Naxos, these are both Strauss's in a way, but where different things are happening. Le Nozze di Figaro has the upper and the lower.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But the teacher is a bit of a connective thread.
Yeah. And I
Talk
think,
about it.
yeah, I think she just sort of appears, and she's sort of in her own world. And basically she'll just sort of, it's her line, her through line, it's like she'll say something, and then there'll be other action, and then it's almost like she picks up where she left off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so incredible that way, because you have to keep the intensity through, even when you're not on stage, and almost like pick up where you just left off. And her guilt is so immense, because she feels that she could have done something. And I think that's kind of what's so amazing about the piece, is when something like this happens, it affects everyone in a different way. And the parents, the victim's mother, the students, the teacher, everybody has their perception of, I could have done something. And so for instance, in her last big speech, she says, after the shooting, she would spy on the students. She would take their drawings to a psychologist and their essays to see if there was any signs of that they were disturbed. And then she finally realizes at the end, which is absolutely shattering, that she had to stop teaching because she didn't feel she was fit for teaching anymore, because all the joy, all the everything was lost. And so at the beginning, she sort of starts her story with, when I was a child, I always was a teacher when I played school as a kid, and then it just kind of arcs and then ends with that final speech. So and I think that the students have different viewpoints as well, and then at the end we kind of find out where the students are that survived and what they're doing with their lives. And it's and I refer back to Dead Man Walking because I feel like it's similar in that it's a really tragic story, and Jake depicts all the different characters and their viewpoints. The mother of the murdered children, the parents of the murdered children, the mother of the murderer. So it's similar in that way, that you really see different viewpoints, and it really opens your mind to things that you may not have thought of. And I think that's the whole point of art in general. And we're lucky in opera that we can do it through music. Sorry to get intense there.
No. I believe in intense. It's how I live. There are operas, many of which you've been in which a singer can play more than one role. For example, there are many singers named Suzanne Menser, who was a Cherubino for many years and then became a Marcellina in Le Nozze di Figaro. When I was watching Innocence, I was thinking that I would love to see the artist who plays the teacher on another night play the waitress.
Yes.
And that the two roles be switched, because one of them is a mother, the other one has numerous children she's responsible for. The relationship is different. They both, in their different ways, are the emotional drivers of the opera.
Yes.
Because frankly, the bride, the groom, and so on are part of the machinery, in my view. I'm getting a little too technical here, but the emotional drivers to me, are the teacher and the waitress.
Yes.
Because it's the horrible realization the waitress has that moves that part of the story. But the teacher is the guardian of memory of the students, and she lives in a longer time frame. Whereas the waitress, and we're not giving anything away here, the waitress lives with grief, but grief that's frozen in one moment.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas the teacher lives across the spectrum of 10 years. And I love watching operas where artists switch roles, and perhaps the two of them switch roles. So, if you have a Grace Bumbury and a Shirley Verrett, you may get one to Amneris, the other Adalgisa. I'm sorry, Amneris and Aida, or Adalgisa and Norma, that kind of thing, where they can't, or the Count and Figaro in Le Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni Leporello in that opera, and Don Giovanni. And, I'm permanently stage directing in my head. And while I watched it twice. The second time I began to think of those two roles switching, and what a great thing it would be to have two great singers switching roles. What do you think about that for this opera?
That would be really cool. Yeah. Because in listening to the teacher, I was like, wow, I'd love to sing that someday, because it's a fabulous role. And I know, I think that would be really, really cool. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Because one, in this case, one role informs the other.
Mm-hmm.
I think the emotional kindling of the fire is the same kindling, but it burns differently because of the way the roles are structured. But
Definitely.
very powerful.
Yeah, it
Um,
was. Yeah.
so it brings up another question that I like to ask singers who are wonderful teachers, such as yourself. You have been doing this in San Francisco for 33 years. You had training in Cincinnati, which is a wonderful place. I've taught there. It's a wonderful place to learn to be an opera singer. And in our time, let's say, when we were starting our careers decades ago, um, social mores were different among people. The way men and women interacted, um, the way, to use different terminology, gay, queer, whatever, was perceived and acted upon. And it was may have been more subtext once. Now it's more open, which is a good thing. But when emotional issues are addressed in opera or in theater or in film or most any art form, um, sometimes, or especially opera, it's built into the music and the experience that a particular character will have had, her backstory, let's say. Um, a singer playing that role, whatever role it is, brings her own experience, her own knowledge, her own feelings, her own outlook, her own prejudices, all of that to the creation of the role. When I work with young people now, a challenge I face, and this is not a criticism of them, but a challenge that I face is alerting them to the backstory that they have to develop within themselves without telling them this is what you experience. Um, Recognizing that what you and I were experiencing 30, 40 years ago was perforce different because society was different. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying better or worse, but definitely different. And how do you, because we also now have restrictions, let's call them, about how we interact with younger people, with anyone else. Obviously, we want to do it. We don't want to do anything that's offensive or upsetting. But frankly, a lot of opera characters have terrible things happen to them, and unless you're Berta, but otherwise, you you have to dig deep in there. And
Mm-hmm.
I find, and again, not a criticism, when I work with young people, American young people, a lot of them apologize a lot. They say sorry constantly. And I always want to say you need never apologize. I want you to feel comfortable. What you're doing is not wrong. You're learning, you're picking and choosing, and as you described the rehearsal process, learning and growing in rehearsal. How do you, as a teacher, work a role with a young artist, either a role that you may have sung, or let's say Maria Cavaradossi in Tosca, that something you'll never sing?
Mm. I hear what you're saying, and I think the way I work it is I work it from text, and I try to help them find their own truth. And I think what's difficult, I think social media has a lot of positive things, but mostly, in my opinion, negative.
Mm-hmm.
um, because you're constantly comparing yourself to other people, and I think it gets in your head, and I mean we're all experiencing it, but I feel that it stunts creativity a little bit, because I feel like, you know, I just think that comparison game is really dangerous. There's always been comparison. I mean, even, I mean, there always is. It's the nature of the game. But I encourage my students to, I always say, the same as you, sorry does not exist in my studio. That word is, every time somebody's, nope, we're not apologizing for anything.
Hmm.
and I encourage them to take up space, to really, really take up space and not be apologetic for who they are, where they've been, what they look like. What I am happy about is that when I was coming up as a singer, weight was such a stigma. And I could write a book of all the, the things that were said to me, if they
Yeah.
were said now, uh, you know, people would be fired right and left.
Hmm.
I just would just absolutely shock you.
Well, I'm going
The
to name one. It's not about you, obviously, but one that I've heard many times in rehearsal studios. I'm not an opera singer, so obviously it's not about me. But where a director, usually British, will say, well, you just can't believe that someone would fall in love with her or him based on their appearance, their size, whatever. And I always point out that in America, where we have at least two-thirds of the population overweight, all those overweight people are falling in love and having happy love lives and full complex lives.
Mhm.
And you're not supposed to necessarily look like Julia Roberts and George Clooney to fall in love on the opera stage. And they can't sing anyway. So, but it's true that as opera has become more visual and a certain kind of stage director has arrived, those people feel they have to impose their vision on the work of, let's say, Verdi and Boito, or
Mhm.
Verdi and Piave, or Wagner and Wagner, um, rather than just let the material work. Have you worked, and you don't have to name names, in fact, I don't want you to, with stage directors who can't read music and don't speak the language of the opera they're directing?
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of experience is that?
Um, I was doing an opera one time where, remember, like CDs,
Yeah.
CD jackets.
Yes.
That's what.
That's where they learn the opera from. Oh, so the
Oh no,
translation.
that's what they were directing. They were holding a
Oh, come
CD
on.
jacket.
Not the
I'm not
score. They
kidding.
were directing from the booklet in the CD, compact disc. Wow.
The assistants have to do all the work, and because they
Yeah.
have no idea, you know, what's going on. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Not so yeah, but it's amazing. Yeah. But that was back in the day. I feel like there has been, especially in the last decade, I feel like I don't know, I feel like there's much less of that. There
Hmm.
still is, there still is that, but I feel like as far as like, you know, behaviors are improving, still not, 100%, but I
Right.
do feel that there has been a shift that's begun, and that makes me really happy. I'm just very happy that my students don't have to deal with all the things that I had to deal with.
Yeah.
And so but yeah, as far as educating, I think if I'm working a role with someone, I have my list, that they have to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G before they even walk into the studio. And so that all of that legwork has been done before they even walk in, because I can't work technically on something if it's not 100%. The language is there, the diction is there, in all the interpretation and everything. Um, and so that's sort of like, I've sent people away if they're not to that point, or let's work on something else, and
Yeah.
so that's number one. And then you can start to really, you know, to really, really, work and delve into the role and who they are. And, everyone has something to bring to the table, you know? And I think, when I'm not a singer that moved into character work. I started as a young singer. I was singing, Marcellina, at big places in my 30s,
Yeah.
and so I sort of, when you're singing those character roles, that you really have to create a world. And I had never, or even, more serious roles, and you sort of have to create the world. If you haven't experienced those things, I mean, I hadn't experienced a lot, at that age. So you kind of have to like come up with a backstory,
Yeah.
and it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
I always say you get your Crayolas out,
Yeah.
and your crayons out, and you kind of create, and then it's really fun when you get to repeat roles, because then you've changed, as a person. I became a mother, I became a teacher, all these different things changed in my life. So then I could bring those things to the roles. But I feel that this generation of singers is also really exciting because they just don't accept the BS.
Yeah.
I never spoke up when I was a young singer because I was afraid I would get fired.
Right.
And if something is said to them that is not they speak up. And I think it's fantastic, because we should not, and I'm going to get on my high horse here, but there's no call for that. And
Right.
and this is 2024. We have to be kind. We can't treat people like this. And so
Right.
I'm really, really amazed at this. Even as I go through the admissions process, we go through the admissions process every year at SFCM, and these past couple of years, I'll have students almost interview me and say, what would your vision of my, where do you think my voice is going? And I was like, wow, okay, well, that's, and I think that's taking ownership. And I think that's, and they're all these, they have all these entrepreneurial ideas, and they're, they're
Yes.
wizards.
That's very interesting generation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're wizards online,
Yeah.
unlike me. And they
Us.
create these fabulous, platforms and websites and all this stuff. And so I think there's a lot of creativity that's happening, and I just think it needs to be, channeled and guided in the right way. And also, like, yes, learn the traditions. And I feel like I was taught by these amazing, the Ethel Evans, was the she called herself the diction coach at San Francisco Opera, but she was much more, she would travel with Tatiana Troyanos back in the day, and she was her dramatic advisor. And she would sit in the back. She would tell me stories. She would sit in the back of a staging rehearsal, and then her and Tatiana would go back to the hotel room. And she's like, "Now, darling, you're not going to do that. What you're going to do is you're going to go here on this night, blah, blah, blah." And she would kind of restage it. And I mean, she would tell me all these fabulous stories. But I was taught by her, and the basic stagecraft. And so that's what I try to, she would always say, lean away from the gesture. She would say, "Darling, we're in a big opera house. You must lean." Well, what that does is it keeps you open. It keeps everything. Whereas if you're doing this, you're, things like that I feel aren't taught so much. So I'm all about the new, but I also think that basic stagecraft is so important for young singers, because it really helps you get a sense of your body on stage and owning the space and taking up space.
Well, next time I come to San Francisco, I'm going to get a good bottle of California wine, and we're going to talk about Tatiana Troyanos a lot. She's one of the artists I work with most.
Really?
And she was, oh yeah, a lot, really a lot.
I am such a fan.
I am too. I cooked for her. I mean, a lot. There are a lot of stories, and I don't mean out of school bad stories, but just how impressive she was. Her
Yeah.
energy, her flexibility, the fact that, I mean, I'll say one thing about her, that it was hard after a performance for her to come down from whatever the role was and go back to being Tatiana.
Mm.
And it was quite a process. And often I would be with her after a performance.
Wow.
And it's not that she was depressed and bemoaning what she didn't do right in the performance, but that the energy and the pitch had been built so high in something like Didon in Les Troyennes, or Venus in Tannhäuser, or Octavian. You name the role,
Mhm.
Santuzza in Cavalleria Rusticana. It took hours. It was only a 70-minute opera, but it took about 4 hours to get her back to herself after performing Santuzza.
Oh,
And
wow.
I mean, she could be very funny, and sort of silly, giddy like Dorabella in Così fan tutte. But there would be times when she just was not ready to go back to being Tatiana.
Mm.
And often it was my job to just sort of be with her until she transitioned back to being able to exit the theater. And
Wow.
it was fascinating. I didn't know John Vickers was that way, but there were not too many. But John Vickers didn't want to talk about it. That was the difference.
Okay.
Troianos was completely living the moment, and something like Kundry in Parsifal. It's a long opera anyway,
Yeah.
and she is the second act having a midi bad scene and then washing its feet and the whole thing, and it was so transcendent, but it
Mm.
also was emotionally exhausting. Someone said to me about her, another mezzo, that she always gave 110%. And when she was giving at such a high level for so long and vocally gorgeous and all that, um, she lifted the game of everybody else, but she exhausted everybody else because they couldn't achieve that level of intensity for so long. Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to pick one role, but I think it would be her Didon and Letray, and it's just one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And I was
Wow.
on the stage for it and the wings and so on. There's nothing like it.
Oh my gosh.
And it exists on video from 1983. I can tell the story now. It's enough ago. Um, we're doing it live on television, and the last 22 minutes didn't quite work. We're doing live to Europe, I think, but not the States. And the last 22 minutes of the opera didn't record right. And I remember that after basically Aeneas sails off to Rome and Carthage is doomed, and Didon kills herself, and it's just phenomenal. It's Berlioz. Um, the director had to go to Tatiana and say, the last 22 minutes didn't work. Can you do it again? That we're going to film it. And we were there till 2 in the morning as
Oh my.
she could decide or not decide if she could do it. And ultimately decided she couldn't do it, that she could not reach that pitch again, that intensity. And, the performance ended about 11:59, it never midnight, 11:59. And we were there at least 2 hours before and Domingo stayed and everyone stayed. And she was not being difficult. She just genuinely was trying to summon that, but couldn't do it. So the video that exists, which is now on DVD, has a black line in it because it was the rehearsal tape of that.
Oh, they spliced
And
it.
yeah, they spliced it. But those experiences of being in the proximity of an artist like that are unforgettable. It wasn't always easy. I'm not complaining at all. It was
Mm.
not easy. But on the other hand, it was so riveting
Mm.
that this is what opera could be. Now,
Mm.
before we got into Tatiana, you triggered a memory in me that I wanted to ask you about. It relates to teaching because you're really good at it, and I'm okay at it, but you're really good at it. I've heard many of your students. Um, about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I was invited to teach a series of master classes at one of America's best universities, but it does not have a music department to speak of.
Hmm.
So and no one who comes out of that university goes on to become an opera singer or musician. They
Uh-huh.
become lawyers and presidents and so on. But um, the professor there wanted me to come teach because he thought that I could bring a moral, a social component to the operas that I would be teaching, which were all Mozart. And each student, there were about 10 or 12 who came to sing for me and work with me and with the pianist, was to bring a Mozart aria. And 11 of them did. The 12th one, a tenor, said, well, I don't like Mozart's tenor music, so I'm going to sing Una furtiva lagrima from Donizetti's Elixir of Boy. And I said, it's a wonderful opera. Pavarotti sings it well, so does Carlo Bergonzi, and so does Alfredo Kraus. But this is about Mozart. He said, well, I don't want I know. And the professor looked at me and I said, okay, you can sing it. And I let him sing Una furtiva lagrima, and I said, thank you. And I didn't work that with him at all.
Hmm.
The other 11 students, none of whom would go on to become opera singers, but nonetheless, they cared about opera, brought Mozart arias. Everything from Martin aller Arten in Führung aus dem Sarai, which is incredibly hard,
Wow.
to, more basic Voi che sapete, which are lovely arias. One of them brought Parto Parto from La Clemenza di Tito. But what would you have done if you're announced to teach Mozart and you have 12 students, 11 of them bring Mozart, one of them brings Donizetti? How would you have reacted?
Well, I mean, did I'm going to rewind a little bit
Yeah.
because I'm presenting a presenter. The pianist has rehearsed with the student. So, I mean, didn't somebody know that this was happening?
No, he just brought it in. He put his
Okay.
music down on the piano and said, he said, I think you know this, which the pianist obviously did. But
I don't know. I would have probably worked with them a little bit, but I would have, I mean, I think if you got to understand the assignment,
yeah,
but I mean, I think that goes back to like the teacher, like who's voice teacher, like should have said what Mozart. Okay, you're singing on this wonderful event with Fred Plotkin. What are you singing? You know, so I don't I don't necessarily blame the student fully. I
right.
also would go back and say, okay, the voice teacher should have like prepared the student for this masterclass. So there's that. So knowing all of that, I probably would have worked with him a little bit, but maybe, um, and then maybe made some suggestions of Mozart arias that he could sing. I know tenor arias
Yeah,
are weird, but I mean, but yeah, I mean, was it a public masterclass?
no,
Okay. Was
there
it
were
just
other music students, but it was not for the public in front of, people in New England who like opera.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, then if his colleagues were there, then I wouldn't have like worked with him a long time, but I would have worked with him a little bit and given him maybe some pointers. But then I would have spent more time with the people that actually prepared the assignment, you
I
know.
just felt he was being disrespectful, not to me. I didn't take it personally, but to his other 11 classmates.
Yeah,
Because if we're learning Mozart, we want to have each one of the 12 give us a Mozart to talk about. And, I'm, you could throw almost any major Mozart opera at me and I can talk about it without having to do too much prep. But I asked for the list and his was to be announced. And then he showed up. And I wanted to say, tenors have a bad reputation already. Don't do this.
yeah,
And he had a pretty voice, but he didn't really know what he was singing about. And I
right.
just felt if we're here to learn Mozart and Mozart's aesthetic, he could have sung from Entführung aus dem Sarai in German
Hmm.
or in English. I don't care really. It wasn't
Yeah,
that
yeah,
because none of them would go on to become opera singers. I knew that.
right.
But it was an opportunity for this university to have a music program, and the professor they had was excellent, and bringing me in from New York was determined a
Mhm.
big deal, and so on, and prestigious for them. That's not my issue. My issue, though, is that basically these kids are all very smart. And if you say you're doing Mozart, they don't have to be reminded a second time.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising actually.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's really surprising to me that that would happen because that would
But,
never
you know,
happen.
because I didn't want to say to the professor what's wrong with this kid. But on the other hand, I know that the professor felt awkward, and
Yes.
I didn't want him to feel bad, so I didn't make a thing. I
Exactly.
wouldn't make a thing of it.
Yeah,
But it
just make
just
the best
struck
of it.
me that,
Yeah.
one thing that, and if you don't want to comment on this, you don't have to. So-called professional ethics or professional deportment, whatever that is, has changed in opera. Um, in that I mean, 52 years ago was my first job in opera, and I'm not ancient. And this is not Botox. But I was 16
Yeah.
and working at the Lyric Opera Chicago. And so I met singers like Tito Gobi and Leonie Rieseneck, Mirella Freni, Alfredo Kraus, when they were already well into their careers. And I watched them and learned from them in terms of deportment and rehearsals and so on.
Hmm.
And, you know, I'm not saying be formal, but it is a matter of respect to your colleagues, to the composers, to the librettists, to everyone around you. And now it's a little more casual. I'm not saying that these younger people are not artistic and creative and original and exciting. They are. The best of them certainly are. Um, but it's just a different time.
It
And
is. Yeah.
I'm
And
not
it,
bemoaning that. I mean, there's an artist I imagine you've worked with. You have the same last name with a different spelling. Sasha Cook is
mhm.
a wonderful artist, and I worked with her at the beginning of her career, and she seems to understand that older ethic. But at the same time, she's very modern and innovative, and has become a good teacher, and so it's
Mhm.
possible.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Well, things
yeah,
like things like this
hmm,
really bug me. So, I mean, I have a note. I mean, you shouldn't even have to say that like during a studio class there's no phones.
right,
Uh but sometimes I'll just look out and say, "Please get off your phone."
yeah,
Um and so what I see sometimes in rehearsals is, you know, you'll be doing your scene or whatever, and then if it goes on to another scene, then everybody sits down and, you know,
yeah, they're checking their messages.
yeah. And so where as young singers, like I feel like if you're in a rehearsal with, you know, I don't know, some big star or whatever, and you're a young artist, I think you should watch the
Have,
rehearsal. I
yeah,
think you should be watching that because that's where you learn.
yeah,
And yes, you learn by doing, but I have learned much more by watching
hmm,
and by observing. And like you said, uh, learning from those, you know, great artists. And we have
right,
many, many great artists right now in the business. And
definitely,
so I'm like, maybe you should be listening. Maybe you should be watching and listening and observing because maybe it's a role that, you know, you're going to sing someday.
hmm,
And maybe you're doing like the, you know, the small role, the two-line role, whatever.
yeah,
But I think, you know, so I think I'm like a broken record, you know, with my students. um Observe, listen, watch, because so much can be, you know, I mean, I always tell the story. I never forget when one of my first assignments I was kind of understudying Marcellina, and it was great. The great Judy Kristen, who is,
Mhm.
kind of gave me the inspiration that yes, I could do this. I could specialize in this repertoire and have a wonderful career. And and but it was Flicka was singing Cherubino, and
Mhm.
I remember I was sitting there. I would sit there day after day, and when she would sing those arias or sing anything, I felt like she was only singing to me.
Mhm.
And there was this intimacy in what she did that I've very rarely seen it since. Something special that she has, and I always tell her. She always says, "Oh, Kathy," but if I was on my phone when Carabino was singing in Marshall, because Carabino and Marcellino never, they really never interact in
Right.
Notes Anything until the finale of Act 4. But if I was on
Well, a
my
little bit
phone,
around the wedding in Act Three, maybe a little
well, I
bit.
guess, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. That's true. Yeah, but I mean,
And Urbino's
you
one
know,
of the flower girls.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Um, but if I would have been on my phone checking my Instagram, I probably wouldn't have really been able to fully envelop that experience. So I'm very much of the fact of honoring the old, but also I'm very much similar to Sasha in that way, and
Yeah.
innovation, and moving the art form forward. But I
Yeah.
also think that there's certain protocols, should be an industry expectation uh of certain things, and I'm very like, you know so I'm I feel
I
like
have a
that's
line that
something.
you can use that works every single time. Um, if a young artist is checking their phone, their smartphone, and let's say we're doing I Capuletti e Montecchi by Bellini, the story of Romeo and Juliet, and they're looking at the phone, and I say, "Did you get a text from Bellini?" And if they say, "Who?" Bellini, the composer of the opera that you're supposed to be paying attention to. Oh no, no. And because occasionally, usually tenors, I had to say this, but it's true, don't know the composer of the opera they're singing in, if it's not a famous one like Puccini and so on. But one that they're maybe learning for the first time and they're covering, and which means understudying. I'll say to them, did the composer, I'll name the composer, send you a text? Did Gluck send you a text? Who?
Who? What?
Gluck. Who's Gluck?
And that's why I'm so excited about your platform, and because I feel like also if I assign a piece, they just go to YouTube, and the
Yeah.
first thing that comes up could be someone's senior recital, you know from
Hmm.
10 years ago that they're listening to. And I'm like, no, have you researched? Have you gone to
Yeah.
the library? Have you listened to Tatiana Troyanos or Mirella Freni or Tito Gobi? Have you listened to? And usually it's just the first thing that pops up. Oh, and so I think also listening is so important. And some people, I mean, I think there's a point where you should stop listening and you have
Yeah.
to really create, but it's also fabulous information to listen to various singers singing different repertoire.
Hmm.
And I think, I mean, oh my gosh, I listened to Marilyn Horn till I was, oh my gosh, the grooves were like in the
Oh, I know.
LP, like wearing down, and Shirley Verrett, and Troyanos and Flicka. I mean, there's just uh the list goes on, but
I think
I
Marilyn,
think
with whom I've worked a great deal, we are friends. We've been friends forever. Again, I'll open another bottle of wine for that one. Um, is of all the opera singers I know who have gone on to become teachers, she's the best.
mm,
And not every great singer becomes a great teacher. And frankly, not every great teacher was a great singer.
Right.
But she happens to be one of the greatest singers ever, who also went on to become a wonderful teacher because she's loving but no nonsense, no
Mm.
BS. And she expects preparation. I don't know what she would have done with this young guy who brought Donizetti when he was supposed to bring Mozart. I can't imagine it. But
Yeah.
a lot of salty language, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. When I if I'm down, I will put on Rossini with either Horn, Berganza, or Federico von Schade and just listen.
Yeah.
And depending what the music is, and that's it. That's all I need. Or
Hmm.
occasionally Guillaume Tell with Nicolai Gedda or someone like that, or Luciano Pavarotti, or the longer lines that Cavalier could sustain, things like that. Beverly
Hmm.
Sills on occasion. Sutherland often Semidamide. You need to pick me up. You put on Semidamide with Joan Sutherland and Marilyn Horne,
Yeah.
and that's all you need.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that Handel album because I did a lot of Handel in my young career.
mhm.
I did Rinaldo and Ariodante, and and her recording, Marilyn's recording of Rinaldo. Oh my
I
gosh.
worked on that show. December 1984. That was the first Handel done at the Met. I worked on that show.
Oh my, like there's a
Samuel Ramey making his Met debut, Carol Vaness making her Met debut, Benita Valente in the it was stunning.
yeah, I would there was an album that Marilyn had of all the Handel, and the Venti Turbini and the Orla
Yeah,
Tromba was on that. And I mean, if you want to dance, I
yeah,
mean,
it's good.
yeah. Orla Tromba. I mean, it's just like it's amazing. Yeah. Or Dopo Notte,
Yeah.
uh, Janet Baker. Yeah. Yeah. Those are my
Now
jams.
Troiano's always went back to Handel
Yeah.
well into her career. Susan Graham does well into her career. She continued. She could have sort of gone down the Wagnerian road or the dramatic Verdi, the Amnerises and the Ebelis, especially. Her Eboli was just unlike anything you've ever seen. But she always kept Handel in the mix,
Mm-hmm.
always.
Keeps the voice healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. One of the artists that I worked with a lot because they would bring in artists to work with the Adler Fellows and the young artists. Regine Crespin.
Oh.
Uh, I worked a lot with her. I know. I know. Oh, she was, I mean, you want to talk about a masterclass? Like,
I mean, for listeners who are wondering what I'm doing, I'm responding in a sexual way. I'm not complaining. Regine Crespin and Eleanor Obrazova were the two hottest singers around in terms of just being in their presence.
I loved, oh my gosh, I love Regine so much because there was a
Yeah.
point in my young, when I was a young artist that some people thought I might go to soprano.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this story. So I'd worked quite a lot with Regine, so she knew my voice pretty well. And we were in the bathroom of all places on the fifth floor at San Francisco Opera.
Mm-hmm.
And I come, she's in the mirror, at the sink, like, checking herself out, and as well she should.
Yeah.
And so I come out of the bathroom and I'm washing my hands, and she was like, "My darling, are you okay? You seem sad today." And I said, "Well, Regine, I don't know. I'm just really upset because, some people are saying, I should switch to soprano, but I just don't feel that in my soul I'm a soprano, and I'm not comfortable up there." And I kind of explained, and she stopped for a second and she was like, "My darling, you have z and you have z, but you really have zit. You stay mezzo. And I went, thank you. I will stay a mezzo. The high, I have the low, but I really have the middle. So
Yeah.
I was like, well, if Regine has given me the blessing to stay a mezzo, then that's it, So, but I love that story. You have
Well, she was, I think, called a soprano, the way Jesse Norman was called a soprano,
yes,
but
yes,
sang mezzo role. She was a great Carmen.
yeah,
Um, she was a Ziglinda, which is a soprano, but a very womanly soprano.
mhm,
Regine Crispin had a womanly sound, and I mean that just in the most positive way, um, because she was sensual without acting the part. So
yeah.
she could be Carmen without acting sensual. She just was.
He just was, yes.
And one of her many hallmarks was she could be in an opera that was not French, which was her native language. And her language skills were always better than anyone else in the cast, including the native speakers. So we would do Carmelites here initially in English and then in French. And she had sung it in French many times, of course. But when she came here and did it in English, her English was better than anyone else in the cast.
Wow.
Yeah. Her German was better.
Mm,
Her Italian was better.
mm,
And I
mm,
once spoke to her about that. And one of the big opera lessons I ever got for my whole working life in opera is what she said to me: Il faut vivre la langue. You have to live the language.
mm.
And whatever your character is, even if you know her in French, if you're singing her in English, you have to live her in English. And so she would know the French intimately, of course, but she was able to go live in that other language so entirely that all the dramatic details were built in because she was living the language.
Absolutely. Oh,
And although my certain languages are far from perfect and I have a thick English or American accent, I understand what she means about you have to live the language.
mm-hmm.
And that's one of my teaching tools. And I always quote her because if I'm telling a student to do that, I'm telling him or her a whole bunch of things you have to go do and understand, because many people learn the words, they may learn it in translation, or the stage director will have the CD booklet there, but you have to fully live the language if you're singing in it or speaking in it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I find that certain languages I speak in, my voice is higher or lower,
Mm-hmm.
depending on whom I'm speaking with. And I don't mean louder or softer. I mean the general range of my voice
Yeah,
will be higher in French, for example, than it is in English.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating. And I think, people ask me all the time, like, if there was one thing that, you would do before launching, as an artist, what would it be? And I always say more language study. There's never enough, and thank goodness for our fabulous coaches.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a really great mimic, and all my language coaches say that. So that's a gift that I just was born with. But I think, I went to Perugia and studied, for a summer, and, you know, going to the country and really experiencing the language. And that's the best way to learn it. If you can't do that, obviously there's other ways you can learn it. But I think because it's our way of communicating. And I think sometimes it's sort of like the last thing that people think about, and it should be the first thing,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just, yeah. So it's really, really, really important for young singers to just like and make big mistakes. I always say, don't shy away from it. Make big mistakes. If you're gonna go for that nasal in French, go for it. And if it's the wrong one, that's okay. We can fix it. But try.
Yep.
and so I think that's a huge thing that I really encourage my students to work on and be curious about, that curiosity of like, why why is this word here and not over here, and really, like, and it's interesting because you have to study diction, but you also have to study the sentence structure and the
Mm-hmm.
actual language. So it's like, it's not only enough just to be able to pronounce it, and that's what Ethel Evans was so amazing, because she spoke like 7 languages
Yep.
fluently. So, I'd bring my Russian into her, and she, and she could explain the sentence to me, and so it was just when you're working with genius people like that, like, you're just like, oh, okay, all right, well, I've got a lot to learn, but I'm going to just, keep
Did you ever
trying.
cross paths with the wonderful American mezzo Mignon Dunn?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I got to work with her actually at a summer program. Joan Dorneman
Yeah.
did the IVAI,
Yep.
and I worked with her. She directed me as Jane Seymour in Anna Bolena in
Yep.
Israel, in Tel Aviv.
Wow.
Yeah, at Joan's program. Yeah.
So what did
I,
you learn from Mignon Dunn?
oh, oh my gosh. Stagecraft.
Mm-hmm.
She is incredible at teaching stagecraft,
Yeah,
and
she is.
she was just so demanding, but in a wonderful way. um I have a fabulous Mignon Dunn story.
You
It's
tell
my
yours, I'll tell mine.
favorite story. So uh I walked into rehearsal one day for Jane, for honorable, oh no, actually it was the end of a rehearsal, and she said, my dear, you need to come early to rehearsal tomorrow because I have something for you. And I said, oh, okay. And if Mignon Dunn tells you to come early, you show up early, because it's Mignon Dunn. And so I came early, and she goes to her bag, and she pulls out a bra. And I'm like, oh, and she says, honey, go put this on. And I said, well, no, I'll put it in my bag and I'll try it, and I'll come back. No, put it on now. And I was like, okay. So I went to the bathroom, I put the bra on, came back to rehearsal, and, woo, and she said, well, that's better, honey. Us big girls, we need support.
Well, I mean, here's a perfect example of something that is wonderful and also dramatically incisive, but I don't think we can do, I certainly could not do that to a woman, but I don't think
No,
you could either.
no,
Or,
no,
yeah.
no. I don't. I mean, but it.
But I mean,
I kept
she
the bra. I kept the bra. So
knew what she was talking about, is what I'm saying. And it was done
it was just
for serious
it
dramatic
helped my
purposes.
posture.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah, and it changed the way I stood. Yeah.
Yep.
And so yeah, but she was, I mean, obviously she was so much more than that, but she was really, really, really amazing on the
And
stage,
practical.
and very
Practical.
practical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, my story is that I was working with her on it was Samson Delilah at the Met. John Vickers and Marilyn Horne, but Mignon was going to be the other Delilah.
Mhm.
And we were in the wings one day, and I love talking to older singers because they're wise, and there's a lot to learn. And I said, this opera's in French, and you speak beautiful French. And she said, well, thank you. She's from Memphis, Tennessee,
Mhm.
and I love singing in French, Frinch, French. And I said, well, what other languages do you like? Well, Italian, of course, because it's Verdi, it's Puccini, and Mozart, and German, it's Mr. Wagner and Mr. Strauss. I sang the nurse in Frau und Schatten, and that's great singing in German, and English, and so on. But, honey, I love that Russian. She sang Marina in Boris Goodenough.
Boris, yeah. Oh,
And she's
wow.
a fantastic Marina. And later sang the innkeeper or the barmaid or whatever it's called in that same opera.
Yeah.
And she loved the sound of her voice in Russian and how it fit. And that's what I mean, the self-knowledge and being
Hmm.
very practical, that she understood that her voice, beautiful in all languages and dramatic, really worked in Russian, which was not her native language at all. But that's what I mean about study and what you mean about study and self-knowledge. Mignon Dunn, along with Tatiana Troyanos, but especially Mignon Dunn, of all the opera singers I've ever seen or worked with, by far took the best curtain calls of all. When Mignon Dunn took a curtain call, she enveloped and
Oh,
absorbed all 4,000 people in the theater.
yes.
Did you ever see a Mignon Dunn curtain call?
Oh, she taught us how to bow.
Oh, tell, please.
Oh, oh, there's a whole yes, and it was so funny because I was working with, we were doing an undergrad opera, and I said, now I'm going to teach you the mignon done, and what it is one leg goes behind the other and
Mhm.
supports the front, so you can go fully down, and you can't do that if that leg isn't back there.
Right,
So she would have us go all the way, and no one could do it like her, though. Oh my
right.
gosh.
But then
Amazing.
she would rise and she'd look up and take in every seat in the balconies and the partial view seats and the no view seats. They saw her.
Incredible.
But hers
Incredible.
was always the same curtain called Troyanos because of what I described before, would come out in the character that she had just played
Ah,
because she could not break character.
yes.
So that her Didon was back from the dead and tormented and victorious in her final. Her Octavian was very formal. Her Dorabella was sort of giddy and silly. Her Santuzza was completely ravaged. Her Eboli with the eye patch, but Tatiana did the Eboli in Verdi's Don Carlo, where she ripped off the eye patch. And what
Oh,
Tatiana did, there's an old scratchy video on YouTube. She kept the eyelid down, but not completely closed. I don't know how she did that. So that while singing O Don Fatale and doing everything she did for the rest of the opera and the curtain call, she had the eyelid almost but not completely shut, as if she, Eboli, Tatiana, were really blind in the one eye. And so she would walk around. And then I once took her back to the dressing room after the performance, and it took about 45 minutes before she opened the eye again. She was just in character. And, her Venus and Tanois are the most unbelievably no bra curtain call there. Um, but could not be more different from her Octavian.
wow.
Completely another person. And that was
Amazing.
what, whereas Mignon done by far had the best curtain call. It was the same one, the one that she taught you. Now I'm gonna get another bottle of wine. I'm
I
gonna
mean,
buy
yes, yeah, a case. We're up to a case. But I think, in movies, I mean, you hear about these actors that just become that person
yeah,
for like,
Daniel Day Lewis.
yeah, for like 2 months or however
Yeah,
long it takes to shoot the
right.
movie. And I think the only time I felt that is I did feel that during Dolores Claiborne, that there was so much drama around the show
Hmm.
that my mentor and teacher, who I just lost last year, unfortunately, Barbara Hahn, she
Hmm.
told me after that performance, she said, I felt like it was just this cumulative release, of all that had happened during that process. And she's like, I'm
Yeah,
not sure that it would have been, not that it wouldn't have been a good performance or a great performance, but she said it was, it was just, it was just brewing in there,
yeah.
and so it was heavy, it's a heavy load. and then when you can finally release it, you go, oh my gosh, wow, and it takes a while to shed it, but I think that was just, but I did not know that about Tatiana Troyanos. That's so fascinating that in like she couldn't let it go in
Whoa, whoa.
hours.
So
Wow.
Kathy Cook, there's something else I know about you. You have to go teach now, right?
I
Am I
do
correct?
have to go teach. Yes.
I would
Yes.
stay with you for hours more. I
I have a student. Yeah, I have a student
know
that's
you do.
taking her first contessa
Wow.
in the summer program. So it's very exciting. It's a wonderful opportunity. So she wants to check in with me, and I kind of know the opera a little.
Yeah. So I think that the Adagio public for Fred Plotkin on Fridays around the world has discovered why you are, as they say in Berlin, a Publikumsliebling, much beloved by the public. You live with the Gold Gate Bridge behind you and the sun setting in the bay, and you are a San Francisco institution. You're like Tony Bennett. You're not from San Francisco, but there's a statue up from the Opera House of Tony Bennett. Am I correct? About
Yes.
2 blocks north on the, I quote, the left side of the street opposite City Hall.
Yeah.
And you are part of the firmament in San Francisco and much loved. And if you're not going to travel to other opera houses, people have to come to San Francisco to see the Portuguese water dogs in the lagoon, go to the market, and go see Catherine Cook at the San Francisco Opera. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Such an honor to spend time with you. And
And a
please,
pleasure.
please, please come and visit, and we can have our wine together.
I'll buy a case. Thank you, Kathy Cook.
Thank you. Thank you so much.